A family bought their dream home in an Australian city for $485,000. 3 years later, they tried to sell it. Zero offers, not a single viewing in 14 months. And here's the part that should terrify you: their neighbors are experiencing the exact same thing. The property market isn't just cooling in this city, it's collapsing in real time. But that's not even the worst city on this list. There's one where home invasions jumped 47% in a single year. Another where the infrastructure so degraded that residents went without electricity for 3 weeks. And one where the median house price dropped $180,000 while crime rates doubled. These aren't struggling towns in the outback, these are major Australian cities. And if you're thinking about buying property in any of them in 2026, you need to hear this first. The pattern you need to understand before we start: economic decline doesn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It creeps in quietly. First, a factory closes. Then a corporate headquarters relocates. Youth unemployment ticks up by 2%, then 5%, then 8%. Rental vacancies increase from 1% to 2.5%, and suddenly investors are panic selling. Before anyone realizes what's happening, the entire city is caught in a death spiral it cannot escape. Job losses lead to population decline, which crushes demand, which drives away investment, which accelerates the collapse further. Once this cycle begins, it almost never reverses. And right now, 10 Australian cities are deep in this exact trajectory. Let's count them down. Number 10, Wollongong, the apartment avalanche. Wollongong sits just 80 kilometers south of Sydney, close enough that people convinced themselves it would catch Sydney's overflow, close enough that developers saw dollar signs and started building. In 2026, Wollongong is completing 840 apartments. That's not a typo. 840 units hitting the market in a single year, with hundreds more in the pipeline right behind them. And here's the problem nobody wants to say out loud: current apartment prices are already too low for new construction to be economically feasible. Developers built these projects when prices were higher, when demand looked strong, when the market felt unstoppable. Now they're finishing buildings in a market that has fundamentally shifted beneath them. The median house price sits at $1.7 million, but capital growth has consistently underperformed larger regional centers. You're paying Sydney-adjacent prices without Sydney-level growth. Meanwhile, unemployment climbed to 5.9% in 2024 and keeps rising. The city's economic base isn't diversifying fast enough to absorb the population growth developers assumed would happen. So what happens when 840 new apartments flood a market that's already weakening? Supply overwhelms demand, prices drop, investors who bought off the plan realize they're underwater before they even settle. And if construction jobs contract, which they almost certainly will once this building surge ends, the rental market will deflate rapidly right as hundreds of new units desperately need tenants. Wollongong isn't experiencing a construction boom. It's watching a slow-motion oversupply crisis unfold in real time. Number 9, Cairns, the diversification myth. Cairns sells itself as the success story. The tropical city that learned from the mining town's mistakes and diversified into tourism, health, defense, and aviation. Look at us, the marketing says. We're not dependent on a single industry anymore. We're resilient. The rental vacancy rate sits at a tight 0.7%, which sounds healthy until you understand what's actually happening. Structural unemployment in Cairns ranges from 8 to 11%, consistently higher than the state average. The city has diversified, yes, but each new sector has hard employment ceilings. Tourism is inherently seasonal and vulnerable to global economic shocks. Aviation contracts when travel demand falls. Defense spending fluctuates with federal budgets. Healthcare grows slowly and can't absorb sudden workforce displacement. So what happens when tourism, aviation, and defense all contract simultaneously during a recession, which they historically do? Cairns has no cushion. The diversification everyone celebrates is actually just multiple vulnerabilities instead of one. One property analyst put it bluntly: if you bought in Cairns 3 years ago, you made money, but there's a strong chance of a correction coming. That's not fierce-mongering, that's pattern recognition. And the pattern says that cities built on sectors that all contract together during downturns do and stay resilient when the downturn actually arrives. Number 8. Geelong. The manufacturing ghost town Geelong sits 75 kilometers from Melbourne, and for decades, it was Victoria's manufacturing heartland. Ford, Alcoa, Shell refineries, real industry, real jobs, real wages that supported real communities. Then Ford closed in 2016, taking hundreds of jobs with it. Shell's refinery shut down, Alcoa has been downsizing for years, and Geelong has been desperately trying to reinvent itself as a service economy ever since. The problem is that manufacturing jobs and service jobs don't pay the same wages. A factory worker making $70,000 a year has seamlessly transitioned into hospitality, or retail making $40,000. The income base collapsed, but the housing prices didn't collapse proportionally, creating an affordability gap that's squeezing the entire city. Meanwhile, Geelong has the same problem as Wollongong. Developers saw proximity to Melbourne and built apartments assuming demand would materialize. It didn't materialize fast enough. Vacancy rates are climbing, investors are exiting, and the city's attempts to attract tech startups and creative industries have generated the employment volume needed to replace what manufacturing provided. Geelong is caught between two identities: no longer an industrial city, not yet successfully reinvented as anything else. And people trapped in that transition are watching their property values stagnate while nearby Melbourne continues surging ahead. Number 7. Townsville. The infrastructure bottleneck. Townsville experienced this exact collapse before. In 2016, the Yabilu nickel refinery closed, triggering immediate population outflow, falling house prices, and years of painful recovery. The city learned nothing from that experience because now history is repeating. BHP recently suspended nickel operations affecting 3,000 workers. Ford cut 700 jobs. Alcoa's refinery closure will eliminate 800 more by 2026, but here's the infrastructure bottleneck nobody discusses. Townsville needs 5,600 new homes within 5 years just to meet current demand. The problem isn't demand, the problem is supply. The city lacks the trunk infrastructure, the roads, sewer systems, water networks, to support that level of development. Building activity would need to increase 67% immediately just to keep pace. It's not happening. Without government intervention, which shows no signs of materializing, the housing crisis will only worsen. Meanwhile, the region has a pipeline of major projects worth $36 billion that are now at risk because the workforce cannot find affordable housing. Townsville is trapped in a paradox. It needs housing to support economic growth, but it can't build housing without infrastructure investment, and it can't secure infrastructure investment without economic growth. That's not a slowdown, that's a structural trap with no clear exit. Number 6. Darwin. The city that empties. Darwin's crime index ranks 3rd highest in Australia, with assault crimes climbing 17% in recent years. But crime isn't Darwin's only problem. It's not even the worst problem. The worst problem is what happens during mining downturns. Darwin doesn't just slow down, it actually shrinks. Real population outflow, not slower growth, actual negative migration. The city's extreme remoteness means there are no alternative employment options when resource work dries up. You can't commute to another city for work. You can't pivot to a neighboring industry. When mining contracts, you leave or you're unemployed. And here's the vicious cycle that Darwin cannot escape. Falling population reduces housing demand, which causes property values to drop, which triggers business closures, which accelerates outmigration further. During previous downturns, entire suburbs emptied, shopping centers lost anchor tenants. Schools consolidated, services disappeared, and when the next mining boom arrived, The city had to rebuild its infrastructure and services from a diminished base, making recovery slower and more expensive than it needed to be. Darwin exists in a perpetual boom-bust cycle with no mechanism to smooth the transitions between them. If you buy property here during a boom, you're gambling that you can sell before the inevitable bust arrives. And if you guess wrong, you're trapped holding an asset that's hemorrhaging value while the city empties around you. Number 5. Hobart. The climate time bomb. Hobart's rental vacancy rate sits at 0.4%, one of the tightest in Australia. Rental costs have surged 43% in 5 years. The median house price is $735,000, creating impossible affordability for average earners. So Hobart has an affordability crisis. Most Australian cities have affordability crises. But Hobart has something additional that most cities don't: existential climate vulnerability. The city faces sea level rise, intensifying heat waves, drought, flooding, and bushfire risks. These aren't theoretical future problems, they're already happening. Insurance costs are climbing faster in Hobart than almost anywhere else in Australia because insurers are pricing in climate risk. And here's what people aren't prepared for. At some point, probably sooner than anyone expects, climate risks will trigger an insurance crisis that forces residents to leave. Not because they want to, because they financially cannot stay. When your insurance premiums double or triple, when insurers start refusing to cover properties in certain zones entirely, when a single weather event can wipe out your equity overnight, you don't have a choice. You leave. Hobart is caught between an affordability crisis and environmental vulnerability, with limited economic dynamism to offset either pressure. The city's economy is too small and too specialized to absorb the shockwaves that are coming. And when those shockwaves hit, property values won't just stagnate. They'll collapse as people realize they've been holding assets in an increasingly uninsurable city. Number 4. Gold Coast. The investor flight. The Gold Coast experienced Australia's second steepest housing boom during the pandemic years. Prices surged. Investors flooded in. Everyone convinced themselves this was sustainable. It wasn't sustainable. Now the Gold Coast faces a matching correction risk, and the warning signs are everywhere if you know where to look. Apartment vacancy rates climbed from 1.1% to 2.0%, an 82% increase year over year. That might sound small, but it signals something critical: investors are exiting. When capital growth stops, investors holding multiple properties panic sell. They're not emotionally attached to the asset, they're attached to the returns. And when returns disappear, so do they. Each investor sale adds supply to an already weakening market, which accelerates price declines, which triggers more panic selling. Meanwhile, median unit prices have actually overtaken Sydney. The Gold Coast is no longer an affordable coastal alternative. Entry prices exceed $1.2 million, and the risk-reward profile has fundamentally shifted. You're paying premium prices for a market that's losing momentum. The Gold Coast isn't collapsing yet, but the foundations are cracking. Investor confidence is collapsing, and when investor confidence goes, prices follow, always. Number 3. Adelaide. When speculation moves on 18 months ago, Adelaide was Australia's hot market. Property values surged, investors competed for stock. Media outlets declared Adelaide the next big thing. Today, investor confidence is collapsing. Adelaide was never the next big thing. Adelaide was the beneficiary of speculative capital that ran out of room in Sydney and Melbourne and needed somewhere new to chase returns. That capital has moved on now, probably to Brisbane or Perth, and Adelaide is discovering what happens when speculative money leaves and the fundamentals were never strong enough to sustain the prices that speculation created. The city faces broader mortgage stress trends. Affordability challenges are constraining price growth. Over-leveraged property holders are starting to panic sell, creating supply surges in a weakening market. Adelaide's economy is stable but not dynamic. Population growth is steady but not explosive. Employment is solid but not booming. The city is fine. Fine doesn't support 30% price growth in 2 years. Fine supports slow, steady, boring appreciation. And when prices were inflated by speculation beyond what Fine can support, the correction is inevitable. Adelaide isn't dangerous because it's collapsing. It's dangerous because it's normalizing, and normalization after speculation means falling prices. Number 2, Alice Springs, the emergency that never ends. In July 2022, alcohol restrictions expired in Alice Springs. Within weeks, the town exploded. Assaults and property damage surged so dramatically that by 2023, the government reimposed strict alcohol bans, no takeaway drinks on Mondays or Tuesdays, purchase limits, restricted trading hours. It didn't work. In November 2024 alone, police recorded 191 assaults and 166 break-ins. By March 2024, authorities declared an emergency situation and imposed a curfew for everyone under 18. Alice Springs now ranks as the 18th most dangerous place on Earth. Not in Australia, on Earth, and the restrictions are scheduled to remain until 2027, which tells you everything about how severe the underlying problems are. Here's what makes this truly disturbing. Those harsh alcohol rules reduced consumption by only 26%. Nearly 3/4 of people still find ways to drink despite the regulations. The restrictions treat the symptom while the disease spreads unchecked. Intergenerational trauma, poverty, overcrowding, these remain completely unaddressed. Alice Springs isn't experiencing a crime wave. It's experiencing societal breakdown, and no amount of alcohol bans or curfews will fix structural problems that governments have ignored for decades. If you buy property here, you're not investing in a community. You're buying into a crisis zone with no resolution in sight. Number 1, Rockhampton, Australia's unlikely crime capital. When you think of dangerous cities, Queensland's cattle country probably doesn't come to mind. But Rockhampton now holds Australia's number 1 crime ranking with 132 offenses per 1,000 residents. That's 1 crime for roughly every 8 people living there. Violent assaults, theft, burglaries, these dominate the statistics at levels that rival developing nations. Rockhampton isn't dangerous because of a sudden crime wave. It's dangerous because the economic base has been quietly collapsing for years while everyone looked the other way. Youth unemployment is crushing entire generations. Job prospects are limited to industries that are themselves declining. Substance abuse has created a pressure cooker environment where petty crime becomes one of the few growth industries left. And here's the trap. Falling property values mean people who own homes cannot afford to leave without taking massive financial losses. So they stay, watching their neighborhoods deteriorate, knowing their equity is evaporating, unable to escape. Rockhampton is the end stage of the pattern we've seen in every city on this list. When the economy collapses, crime fills the vacuum. When crime rises, remaining residents flee. When residents flee, property values crater. And when property values crater, anyone left behind is trapped. Rockhampton isn't just Australia's most dangerous city. It's a warning of what happens when economic decline reaches its inevitable conclusion, and it's happening right now. The question you need to ask yourself isn't whether these cities will struggle. The question is whether you can afford to be trapped in one when the full consequences arrive. These 10 cities share a common trajectory: economic decline that accelerates into population loss, which destroys housing demand, which drives away investment, which makes recovery nearly impossible. Once this cycle begins, it rarely reverses. The smartest move you can make in Australian real estate isn't finding the next boom city. It's recognizing which cities are already past the point of no return and staying far, far away.